it was an energy psychology conference. And I was blown away by these PhDs and MDs who are doing healing from a distance and prayer to diagnose breast cancer and that kind of thing. So I wanted to find out, how can they be so courageous to go against the materialist paradigm, the physicalist paradigm. So that's what motivated me. And I was really pleased that Larry Dossey, who I really admire, has written a lot of best-selling books, said, I just finished reading your Mysteries of Healing, Dialogues with Doctors and Scientists. I've known most of the contributors for many years, but I knew almost nothing about their backgrounds and their private thoughts about the issues you raised. The book is a profound contribution to our understanding of consciousness, healing, and basic common sense in living in today's complex world. And we may think that we've always had this kind of materialist, physicalist viewpoint, that the physical is all that there is, that consciousness stems from the physical. But paradigms and worldviews change. So, you know, the Copernicus revolution in the 16th century was, before him, they thought that the Earth was the center of the solar system, right? And it was heretical. He got into big trouble for saying, oh no, the sun is the center of the universe. So our paradigm has changed since the 15th century. And those changes are really resisted. I'm really interested in a very old novel published in 1884 called Flatland, because it's a good metaphor for trying to change paradigms. It's about a man who lives in a two-dimensional world, and he somehow comes out into the 3D world and discovers 3 dimensions. And then when he goes back to his world, they say, oh, you're crazy. There's no such thing as 3-dimensional world. You must be out of your mind. And so that's kind of how we are today. When we say consciousness is the ground of everything, the materialists say, oh no, you're crazy. That's not how it is. So there's a Mexican researcher who lives in Sweden named Etzel Cardina. And he wrote a really useful article where he collected all the evidence for psi. And psi is the Greek letter P that stands for psyche, for the spirit. And in return, skeptics called Arthur Reber and James Alcock said, pigs can't fly, so why should we study pigs, flying pigs? It's impossible. So it's impossible that you could have telepathy, clairvoyance, healing from a distance, precognition, clairsentience, and all that. So this is really the dominant worldview, is pigs can't fly, so why study pigs? So it takes a lot of courage to go against this viewpoint. So they didn't even read his evidence. They said, oh, common sense, you can't do these things, so we're not going to bother studying. Chris Rowe is a British professor, and he said, you know, you don't have to prove psi anymore. There's been thousands of studies. Now what we need to study is, how is it done? So how do we do telepathy? How do we do healing? And Brian Josephson is another interesting guy that I interviewed, who's a British Nobel Prize winner for physics. And he says science today governs by consensus. So we believe that pigs can't fly, so we're not going to study flying pigs. So they leave out all kinds of interesting things, like water has memory or psi. So the new research focus is, they say, yeah, one study you can't really do anything about. You can't say that proves it. So they do a meta-analysis. We look at 100 studies who have the same outcome, and then we can say, okay, look, there's clear evidence that psi phenomena exist. And a new kind of theme is consilience. And what that means is looking for evidence from all different kinds of fields, being really eclectic and drawing from different sources. And then that'll help us explain psi. Bill Bengtson is on the panel, and he's done really amazing work healing mice with breast cancer. And it's done with frequency, intention, that kind of thing. And he said, everything you think is true is wrong. So that's the way to approach it. Bernardo Kastrup will be on the panel on Saturday, and he says materialist dogma is making us collectively mad. And we're enmeshed in a collective trance that leads to immorality. And what he means is if you believe there's no afterlife, there's no karma, there's no reincarnation, there's only material, the only thing that's worthwhile is collecting things, then you're going to do immoral actions. So he said the materialist worldview that we live in is really harmful. It harms the planet, it harms people. We got to change it. So what is this new consciousness paradigm? Dean Radin is probably the most famous researcher in psi work. He's at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And he says what's needed for a new paradigm is a more comprehensive model of reality where consciousness becomes just as fundamental, if not more so, than materialism. So that's really it in a nutshell, that spirit comes first, then material, not the other way around. And this is not new. Ancient Greek philosophers said mind and consciousness is primary. Ancient Hindus, Buddhists, Jains recognized that the material world is Maya, illusion, and that thought, meditation is central. And so yogis, others could do siddhis, spiritual powers like clairvoyance or bilocation. They could be seen in two places at one time. Autobiography of Yogi by Yogananda writes about that.
I'm reading that book.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, it's powerful, huh? So the question is, all right, well, what is consciousness? And almost everybody that I interviewed said, whoa, that's a hard question. I hope you wouldn't ask me that. So it's really hard to define, but some of the concepts are one mind, that's Larry Dossey, spirit, energy, the force, like we know from the movies, matrix, hologram, meaning fields, biofield, cosmic intelligence, information, panpsychism, beyond space and time or non-locality, substrate, non-physical web, spiritual computer, fifth dimension. And this cosmic intelligence talks to us in mathematics, zeros, ones, and patterns like fractals. But I don't know if that helps us understand it. It's spirit, not material. So to summarize what I learned from these interviews with these fascinating MDs and PhD scientists, quantum mechanics is closest to reality. Quantum mechanics and psi involve consciousness from an unknown source that can't be shielded, and it exists beyond space and time. So we're used to thinking there's this local reality and time is linear. And in fact, that's not true. So the world is much more, Einstein called it spooky action from a distance. It's much more spooky than common sense would have us think. I learned that our brains are just filters and transducers. They don't create consciousness. And the fact that people have consciousness and mind after death or in near-death experiences when their brains are dead, like even Alexander, indicates that the brain doesn't produce consciousness. It transmits it, it receives it, but it doesn't produce it. So there's a mind outside of our little brains that contains information and intelligence. And then the third takeaway was materialism greatly limits our abilities. And Minos Kafatos, one of the interviewee said, we're more than we think we are. And that's really the key. Materialism limits us. Access to consciousness gives us power, information, guidance, healing. Then my next question was, as I said, who are these brave people? How can they take on the establishment? Larry Dossey says it takes a rabble rouser to actually develop the courage to take on the establishment. In terms of their backgrounds, more were firstborn than latterborn, 35 compared to 26. There were first generation immigrants from India, Latvia, Palestine, Ireland, Brazil. For people who are interested in astrology, Sagittarians were the most common. Sagittarians ask deep questions. They're adventurous, so that makes sense. And then followed by Aquarius, who are visionaries, Libras, who seek justice. That makes sense. The main problem that I saw is that most of the people that I interviewed are older white men. And when John Kruth, who took over at the Rhine Center at 48, he was one of the young people. So we need to do more to encourage young researchers. And I just found out that there's a consciousness studies program that was started at the University of Washington, and they have a minor in consciousness studies. So that's,
Whoa.
yeah,
That's cool.
that's encouraging.
Yeah.
The firstborns, they tend to be firstborns, ENFJs on the Myers-Briggs, SAGs. They were motivated by curiosity. What's true? And many of them had extraordinary experiences, or a family member, usually a mother, had these experiences. So it's like, whoa, my mother knew we were going to move to this town way before we even knew that town existed. Jeffrey Mishlove interviewed over 1,000 visionary scientists for his video show, New Thinking Aloud. And he said a lot of people have Jewish background. The Jews are a tiny minority, but they're prominent in every cutting edge activity in which I've ever been involved. So I thought that was interesting, because Jews stress learning, scholarship, and are on the edge. So they're used to being not the dominant culture. And Jeffrey said, I would say that 95% of the people who explore these areas scientifically do so because, like me, they've had powerful personal experiences. Also, I was interested in their personality types, and on the Myers-Briggs type indicator, only all of them scored sensing rather than intuitive. So 2 men scored sensing, all the rest of them are intuitive. They're also more extroverted than the typical research scientist. So they're extrovert, intuitive, feeling, and close on whether they like open options or structure. So what are the applications of moving into this new paradigm of consciousness? Chris Rowe says our current psychological model of what is to be human is incomplete. We have these kind of psi abilities that we need to recognize and develop. Another application is mental and physical healing. And everybody knows about the placebo effect, but it really has been kind of dismissed as an irritant to pharmaceutical companies when they're drug testing their pharmaceuticals. But if I believe that this pill is going to protect me, and it does, we got to harness that. The Institute of Noetic Sciences has done lots of studies of spontaneous remission where people were in stage 4 cancer and remitted. People with dissociative identity disorder are really interesting because one alter can have diabetes, the other subpersonality does not. One of the subpersonalities is allergic to this medicine, the other is not. One needs glasses, the other doesn't. That's really powerful when you think that the different personality in the same body has different health outcomes. That's pretty profound, don't you think?
Yeah.
We know that focused attention, like in prayer, has impact on material things, not huge, but more than by chance. Bill Bengston will talk on Saturday about his work. What he does is he injects mice with breast cancer, and then he recruits skeptical students and others to put their hands around the mice's cage, and his mice get healed. Their cancer, their ulcers get bigger, and then they heal. Whereas untreated mice injected with the same cancer die. His treated mice live the ordinary mice lifespan, which I think is 2 years. And he says what's going on is resonance and frequencies. He thinks that he goes into the future when the mice want to be healed, and the frequency gives the information for the mice to heal themselves. And he's doing this thing where he records the frequency in the room where the healers are working on the mice, and then sends the frequency out through speakers, and it changes the genetic structure of cancer cells and does healing. So if you think about that, maybe in the future there'll be recordings. You're diagnosed with breast cancer, you get the recording of the frequency and you're healed. Another interesting thing about him is that his technique works to take things away, like Alzheimer's, cancer, depression, but it doesn't work to add, like Parkinson's is a deficiency in dopamine, so it doesn't treat dopamine. So there's something about his use of frequency that takes away the problem, but doesn't add a solution to something like Parkinson's, which I thought was interesting. We know that hypnosis changes people's bodies. Medicine will work with the biofield, with the aura, the chakras, like some of us do. Medicine in the future will integrate Chinese traditional medicine, energy, psychology, ancient Ayurvedic Indian practices. So our whole healing world can change with this new consciousness paradigm. And also it opens up to guidance and information from intuition, ESP, dreams, doing healing work in dream circles where we dream for you, doing meditation. And we know that people who've had near-death experiences travel to other dimensions and learn a lot. Another kind of application is resolving grief. There are techniques where people who are grieving the loss of a loved one who died can communicate with them. Some of the scientists are working on devices that are fueled only by your intention. So I intend that the light switch goes on and it goes on. Agriculture. So we work with organic agriculture and blessing the seeds and using intention as part of agriculture. Rupert Sheldrake, his concept of morphic resonance fields would answer questions like dark matter and dark energy. He explains them through these fields. You could prepare for future events with remote viewers, with precogs, Julia Mossbridge calls them. And some people have made money using remote viewing on the commodities market, like the silver market. They made thousands of dollars, like Russell Targ, Stephen Schwartz, and Garrett Modell. And last is resources, and we end with this cartoon. Yeah, well, I didn't believe in reincarnation when I was your age either. Okay, so Stop share. So any reactions to that?
Yeah, what
Well-
was it you said about the hypnosis part again? That it changes your biology?
So if a hypnotherapist says, this person in hypnosis, this is a cigarette. I am putting this cigarette on your skin. The person gets a blister
Oh,
because my body thinks, oh, it's burning me. I should get a blister. And people use hypnosis, as you know, to get out of their addictive patterns to alcohol or drugs or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, in other words, we're working with the subconscious beliefs, and hypnosis can help change them.